Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. My name is Gary Gomes. I'm here to talk to you about Vedic astrology and the forces shaping our world. Uh, I do this every week on Great Indian for cable television for about 3 years now, and it's nice to ring in 2022 with you. Essentially, Vedic astrology is a system of astrology developed in India. Some people have problems with the terminology. I tend to really not worry about that. It's essentially a form of astrology which uses a star-based or sidereal zodiac. So what that means is essentially the signs are almost one whole degree back from where they are in Western astrology. And this affects interpretation, obviously. And the other important factors connected with it is it uses a bunch of what are called little planets or upagrahas. These aren't asteroids; these are calculated points. And also, it also uses what are called dashas or planetary periods. There are also sign periods, right? What are called Rashi periods. And so, let's say you'll be going through the sign of Virgo or Libra or Scorpio or Sagittarius, etc. That'll be one kind of a period you're going through, and you'll encounter the traits that show up in your chart connected with that particular sign, and also with the planets occupying it. Also, and these are and this system of astrology called Gemini uses what are called fixed karakas, and that means fixed movable karakas. My apologies. And these are essentially called charakarakas, and they change by the degree position they're in each chart. So let's say you have a planet which is at very high degree, like 29 degrees. That's going to be your Atmakaraka, and that'll be a substitute for the sun in your chart, let's say. So, and the Darakaraka will be a substitute. That's the planet lowest in degree in your chart, regardless of signs. That's how you deal with others. That's going to be fulfill the function of relationships. So it's sort of a Venus kind of a planet. And Indian astrology also has planetary dashas. So a person who is going through a planetary period and Venus is very well placed or exquisitely placed, that Venus period will be magnificent. They'll have pretty much everything they want and the planet Venus or the sun or the moon or Mars or the North Lunar Node. And all these planets have significations connected with them. There are some major planetary periods that are better than others. That is, everything seems to go more easily. They're more successful. There are others which are more difficult than others. So these are the basic principles of Indian astrology. It also has to do, for those who believe in such things, with the status of the soul based upon reincarnation. So essentially, it doesn't mean the person's a bad person or they're paying for crimes they've committed in previous lifetimes. That's not the idea of reincarnation. But essentially, there's a set of desires or ambitions that we bring into this world that we haven't fulfilled in previous lifetimes, or maybe we've taken more than we should have. So that's the other side of karma, which most people are familiar with. And so there's some kind of repayment. The good news is people with difficult lives usually progress more quickly spiritually. People with easier lives usually tend to say, this is a pretty easy lifetime. I don't have to change much about myself. I'm pretty happy. Or also go on for big accomplishments because that's what they want to do. That's the merit they're bringing forth into this lifetime, and they can actually fulfill some dreams or some ambitions in this lifetime. And everybody's chart has that. Bill Gates' chart has that. Joe Biden, Donald Trump, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi, whoever you want to think of as a person. Famous actors and actresses will bring that kind of karma into their lifetimes as well. So essentially, and there are ways in Indian astrology you can ameliorate some conditions. And when I say ameliorate, you can lessen the intensity of the experience you're having, or maybe increase the intensity depending on what you want to do uh, with your life. So let's say you have ambitions to become I'll just use a screenwriter as an example, and you've been having some bad luck. Well, so essentially, the planets connected with media tend to be Mercury and Ketu, and to a certain extent Rahu in terms of fame. So you can strengthen those planets by wearing certain stones and doing certain rituals. It's not going to turn you from an unknown into a famous screenwriter overnight. That's not how it works. But basically, it'll help further those goals for you or those ambitions for you. Likewise, if you're having a lot of health problems, you can get certain stones which will help in those areas, or certain stones which will help in terms of money, things like that. So these aren't health prescriptions. These are ways of strengthening the planets, so the energy of the planet becomes more positive for you. And these have to be approached with some care. It's usually recommended an astrologer make the recommendation for you rather than you self-prescribe, because essentially the astrologer can look at the chart and see whether or not doing remedies like this will trigger negative consequences in your chart. So again, this is something which is an old science. It's not something, it's thousands of years old, according to the Hindus. By some calculations, around 6,000 years old. Yeah. So in doing this, I want to give you a little bit of background about myself. I've been a Vedic astrologer for about 32 years now. I've been the vice president and president of the Council of Vedic Astrology, an international organization devoted to Vedic astrology, and I held those posts between roughly 2003 and 2004 and 2010, excuse me. And I was on the board of the American Council of Vedic Astrology before that, and I was also I have been and am currently a faculty member at Kepler College, and am also a faculty member and was one of the first faculty members of the American College of Vedic Astrology. So I've been doing this for a little while, and I received a couple of recognition awards from India, which I'm very proud of. I'm very happy that they would recognize somebody from outside the country as deserving of special merit, which is nice. We continue to earn special merit even if we get it. So this is something. This is something. I'm not going to say I've made it, because that's wrong. But basically, like, I just did want you to know I had a couple of awards, and also I've written on Vedic astrology. I'm working on a book. I'm also working on increasing this YouTube channel's activity. So if you can subscribe, or else even unlike, but subscribe and give me recommendations, make requests, anything you like, as long as it's legal and as long as it's clean. Okay, so I'm going to go, first of all, what I like to do in these sessions is I like to look at the chart of what's happening right now. I'll be a little bit more expansive because we're in a new year. I gave a little bit of New Year predictions last week, and actually in last week's broadcast and in the previous week's broadcast, I did indicate there were going to be storms in the western states, and I'm sorry to say those predictions came true. So those are actually, believe it or not, those are fairly easy predictions to make in astrology. They're not really complicated ones, but I'll show you what I mean when we go to the chart. So I'm going to share the screen with you right now. And you should see me in the upper right-hand corner and all this other stuff happening in across the rest of the chart. Now, I'm probably more talky than I normally am in these sessions because we have a Gemini rising in this chart. So Gemini is kind of a talky sign. It's kind of extroverted. And Mercury's in the 8th house, so we're exploring the unknown. So we can actually describe the situation you're in. We're describing hidden things. So this is the first house up here, that thing we see A11. And the 8th house is down here where that S, A, and M, and E are. So that's a Saturn-Mercury conjunction. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Well, it means basically this will be a little bit slower, at least in terms of the broadcast. And also, if Saturn's conjunct Mercury, we're going to be talking about some negative things or some unexpected things that are coming up. It isn't a bad chart. You have Sun, Venus with a retrograde Venus, and the Moon in the first house. So it's essentially the dark part of the Moon. The Moon has essentially no power right now. It's like a light switch has been turned off or it's been dimmed all the way down. And within about a day, it'll be down to 0. So basically, the Moon in this chart has no power. So if we're looking at the second house, which has to do with finances, it indicates this chart is focused a lot on finances with other people. There are concerns about the spouse. There are concerns about happiness, wealth. There are also some concerns about luck because the 5th Lord is in the 7th house. And what this usually does in charts is the 7th house is the same rising sign as the United States chart. So essentially, this will give a lot of anxiety and a lot of impatience to the United States right now. I don't know if you noticed it, but I certainly noticed that people's tempers were just like, over the past couple of days, they were just really short. And that was because of the Mars conjunction. And we had shootings, which is something I should have said, but we had shootings over the past couple of days. And also, and that was because Moon was with Mars and K2, so that gave a certain amount of violence, something aggressive happening. So it wasn't only the fires, it was essentially the fires and the winds and the storms. It was also storms within people. And a lot of times when you see this kind of a combination, you'll also see, this is what I like to call, in Vedic astrology, it's not quite a line combination, but it's essentially a justification combination. So Mars deals with logic. If K2 is with Mars, K2 doubles up the logic. So there'll be a certain aggression even in communications. It was stronger yesterday, to be honest. But also, one of the things you'll see is that people will be anxious to shut down other people in communications because of the Saturn-Mercury conjunction. So this Mercury essentially affects our media in the United States in particular, but it's essentially the ruler of media universally. In the United States chart, there's a Mercury-Rahu conjunction in the 8th house. So to a certain extent, and this is not to be meant to be taken in the wrong way, to a certain extent, if Rahu is with Mercury, most of our media tends to thrive on panic, okay, because Rahu causes panic, it causes fear, it causes anxiety. And it's also hidden, and it's hidden in the 8th house. So the media is untouchable, it strikes. I'm trying to think of a good way to put it, because I'm trying not to be disrespectful, but it strikes almost like a cobra, almost like a snake, because it has that ability to, number one, dig up facts, which it will do, but it'll also dig up facts for certain purposes. It'll dig up facts to make people anxious, to fill people with unrest and dis-ease and anxiety. So that's one of its purposes. Now, this is not really a negative thing, because essentially this is a business society. Media is a business. It has to keep interest going. It has to keep the person engaged. It can do that by essentially saying something horrible is going to happen if we don't do something, or something not horrible is going to happen if we do something. It's that kind of so we have a lot of issues which are important issues, but which are made to be like overly dramatic. If I can use that term, and I can use that term. So that's one of the traps in paying attention too closely to media or hanging on it too much, because it's in its interest to keep you engaged, to keep you fired up, to keep you anxious. And that's true not only of right-wing media, but also left-wing media, also middle-of-the-road media. Everybody wants you watching their show. That's basically it. I want you watching my show. Technically YouTube is, I don't work for CBS, but YouTube is a media instrument. So it's a communicational instrument. So media is essentially not a corporation. It's a tool. Okay. So if I'm transmitting over, if I'm at home printing out, in the old days, I'd be printing out a hand press and handing these things out on the street. Now I'm on YouTube and I'm talking about astrology on YouTube. I don't have my hand press where I'm reading the astrological forecast. I'm essentially going straight to YouTube and printing out prints of this. So essentially, the difference between YouTube and major networks is major networks are established channel. YouTube is basically sort of not really the new kid on the block, but sort of like the underground, or sort of like the kids without a lot of commercial support. So basically, what we have here is a lot of bad news from the media. That's showing up first of all. Rahu's in the 12th house. If Rahu's in the 12th house, we have a lot of fear of loss. Rahu gives fear and anxiety. It gives dissatisfaction. Mercury is the Lord of the 4th house, so there's a fear about security, a fear about of danger. Sun, Mercury, Sun, Venus, and Moon, that's good for celebration. So, we're at New Year's. This is when people normally kick back and have a few drinks or go to parties. So that's perfectly appropriate. The sun's in Sagittarius this time of the year every year in Indian astrology. It would be in Capricorn in Western astrology, but Sagittarius seems much more fun-like, much more future looking, future oriented. And Jupiter in this chart is in the 9th house. So what's that going to give? That's going to give good news about medicine over the next few months. And we'll start to see a lot more good news about medicine around January, February. But we're already starting to see some products come out right now, which are effective in attacking COVID when it first shows up in the person's system. We're seeing some treatments. There's obviously some concerns about our defenses, because that's an 8th house matter. So the Saturn, Mercury, our defenses for COVID aren't that strong, and Mars and K2 will make it spread a little bit, but this is not really a strong spreading chart. The Mars K2 conjunction reflects, I think, Omicron. And Mars and Jupiter are in angles to each other. Now, if Jupiter were like one sign beyond, this would be much more dangerous. It's not, and it's not going to be there until next summertime. And by that time, Mars will have shifted signs. So this is really, I would say, a brief dent in the wall right now, what we're experiencing with Omicron. It doesn't mean COVID isn't serious. It certainly is. But the current strain isn't that serious. It's just rapid spreading. The other thing we have right now, and again, I'm no scientist, so this is not a medical opinion, but I'm just saying it's an astrological opinion. The other thing is, though, with this chart, the seventh house is what they call hemmed in by malefics. So Saturn's over here and Mars is over here. So what does that mean in plain English? Well, it'll feel like we're surrounded by problems with other people. So, okay, so this is a perfect analog for concerns about that Russia is going to do something or that China is going to do something over the next few months. I don't think you'll see anything really connected with that. But we're going to look at the astrocartography map just to make doubly sure. And we can see essentially where these planets are going to move. So Mars is going to move into Sagittarius in roughly in January, mid-January, excuse me. And K2 will move into Libra in around the end of March. Mercury and Venus will move into Aquarius roughly around the same time, around April, early April, and you'll have a 3-planet conjunction in Aquarius. So that means good news for medicines. The United States will probably be more warlike or more aggressive next month, but not right now. And the chances of a war or a conflict breaking out, I mean, there may be a small conflict from Russia on the border of the Ukraine, but the chances of a major war breaking out are nearly infinitesimally small. The other thing we have to look at in terms of the chart, so I'm going to look at the U.S. chart for just 1 second. So I want to focus on the U.S. I'll focus on other countries in subsequent readings. All right. So this is a chart that I've picked. So right now we're in a Saturn subperiod until September of 2023. So, and we're in a Saturn Venus subperiod until May 3rd. So Venus is one of our war-making planets. Surprisingly, it's Venus is supposed to be all love and beauty in Western astrology, but it's also connected with war. And if you think about the idea of passion in relationship and competition in relationship to obtain love, that makes perfect sense. Also, Venus is one of the planets connected with victory in war. So essentially, and one of the avatars of Vishnu, a priest called Parashurama, or Rama with a battle axe. He's a big muscular guy who wears a lion cloth, and he's big and bulky and stronger than anybody. That's the incarnation of Vishnu through the planet Venus. And you say to yourself, oh, geez, Venus is supposed to be this sweet and lovely young girl or your young lady, and it's supposed to be connected with arts, beauty, all those other things. But in all those fields, there is conflict in every single artistic field, and the conflict is not really visible to those who are outside the field, but it's very visible to those who are inside the field. So essentially, there's competition. Okay, there's also the creative process, which can be very difficult to manifest. So the person has to work really hard. And you also have to conquer commercial considerations or commercial setbacks. So it's not really that odd to see Venus connected with war, but we're in a Venus subperiod right now. There's a lot of conflict connected with Venus. Venus was just with Saturn, so that gives a certain amount of pessimism. Now it's back in Sagittarius. I'll make us a little bit more optimistic over the next few months, but it's still a very difficult time for getting into relationships with people, for manifesting relationships, those kinds of things. And that retrograde won't be over until around mid-January. And even then, it'll cause some delays in relationships. But as of April, Venus will be fine. Now let's get back to the US chart. So that Venus subperiod, what does that mean? Well, Venus is the lord of the 6th house of enemies and the 11th house of gains. So whenever the United States engages in some kind of a conflict, there'll be some gains. But that's actually cautiously optimistic between now and May, because we'll actually see some financial gains for the United States, some increases in competitiveness. We'll see a lessening of some of the negatives we've seen over the past few months. It won't tamper down inflation, as Venus is an expansive planet like Jupiter is, but it will help to modify it. Also, Jupiter is going over the US chart's moon, and so you'll start to see a little bit more logical thought connected with vaccines, with foreign policy, with domestic policy, things like that. So I'm guardedly optimistic the next few months, although tough, will be fruitful. I think you're going to see a period, though, between February and March where people are going to be a little bit depressed and a little bit down. That's normal for winter, but there's also a storm current which is happening right now, which is very strong because of the Venus retrograde, and we'll talk about that in a second. So at least from the chart, so we do have some anxiety. This chart does reflect a certain amount of anxiety. By the way, next week I'm going to talk about the Chinese New Year chart. The week after that, I'm going to talk about the mundane chart for the year. So that's a little bit different. But let's look at this time and space change. So we have communications hidden, maybe secret. So we're having secret conferences with Putin, but this is happening all over the world. This is just happening in the United States. There's some tension because of economic issues, and certainly the virus, K2 rules viruses. Sun, Moon, and Venus in the 7th house, some worry about losses, but also some good luck coming in due to previous relationships. And finally, Saturn in the 8th house. Don't get depressed by listening to the media. The media is really not, it's not that it's not accurate. You have to filter what you're told. And I don't mean filter that with conspiracy theories. I mean essentially figure out who's saying what and whether or not it serves your interests to get worried, or whether or not it's just something to keep you addicted to watching the news. Okay, I'm not saying you should stop watching. I'm just saying you should apply a really careful filter. And I'd advise this in any environment, not just the current one. Okay, all right. So, and again, I don't dislike the media. I actually was almost once a part of it. I was a journalism major in college, And I think the media has done some very fine things, but I also know they're a business. So that's where my hesitation comes from. Now, if we look at this chart, you can see the moon's close to Hawaii and the sun is close to Hawaii. So right now Hawaii's sort of it's really not in a bad state. It's just sort of like between two powerful entities and close to Venus. So it's really not that badly, but it is a little bit tied off and constricted in terms of its economy and its expenses. We do have a Saturn line and a Rahu line running through southwestern California, so I think we can expect some more storms and some more weather problems in southwestern, so around San Diego and even going north up into Nevada, or I'm sorry, Colorado. My apologies. No, that is Nevada. Okay, that is Nevada. And that Rahu line is going through Baja California, so there's some fear or isolation down there. And we have a Mars and Jupiter line happening right below Texas and joining in Mexico, or in Mexico, not in Mexico City, but in Mexico. So what that means in plain English is there's going to be, I would say, a lot of violence, a lot of disturbance around Mexico, and heading close to Nicaragua, and also Argentina and Chile. The moon is passing through the middle of the country, and it's connecting with Jupiter right here, but this is a weak moon, so this will cause some anxiety, some fear among the people, especially about disease. And that'll continue really down, all the way down through roughly Arkansas and Georgia. All right, and there's the descendant line running through New Jersey, descending line of the sun running through New Jersey and Delaware and Pennsylvania. So that means increased government authority there, increased centralization of authority in that part of the country. As we go to Venus, New England looks okay, but again, that centralization of authority is going to extend there. And Mercury is actually heading down. Mercury and Venus are heading down through Brazil, and so is the sun, and so is the moon. So essentially, Brazil, as it has been for the past few months, is going to be in serious trouble in terms of the government and also in terms of the population. But there will be some new cures that Brazil will have. Brazil will have a lessening of. It'll have an increase of infection rate, but it'll actually have more cures delivered to them because Venus rules out allopathic medicine. Now, as we go over to, there's nothing really close to Iceland except for Rahu. So again, this is sort of like a panic situation in Iceland. But I don't see anything really negative. I mean, this line is perilously close to a volcanic island, so that could indicate a volcanic explosion, but it's not really a certainty. The other thing is, on the west coast of Africa, you see that Rahu line. So this will give some government scandals or some government foibles, some government follow-ups, some popular unrest. There's a nice Mars line running through France and England. I say that advisedly, and a little bit of close to Spain and Algeria. And that usually indicates some violence or a tendency towards violence in these countries. Okay, so anybody who's traveling there and those countries itself, especially around Paris and London, be very careful. Let's see now. Moon is passing through Eastern Europe and Italy, and Sun is passing through Turkey. So this will again bring some fear or some anxiety to that part of the world. I don't think you're going to see anything like an earthquake. I keep a close eye on Turkey and Eastern Europe because essentially they've been earthquake zones for the past few years, and I try to, of the places I'm aware of, I try to keep a conscious eye on how they're doing weather-wise. The other areas which look especially bad for droughts and heat waves are essentially Africa and all the way down to Mozambique. So Venus is passing through Western Turkey, going up close to the Ukraine. So there is a possibility of some kind of a armed conflict there over the next month and a half. Venus is also mercantilism to a certain extent. So I think you'll also see some trade sanctions imposed by the current administration. That's a pretty easy call. They've already said they would do that, but I think this is a certainty within about a month's time. The other combination I want everybody to look out for is Saudi Arabia. It looks like it's going to be having some problems with rains. I'm going to just say it flat out rains, and so is Iran. And those areas are typically not rainy areas, so I'm really going out on a limb here. Saturn is passing through over both Afghanistan, central Russia, and Pakistan. So those parts of the world will probably see some financial hardship and some problems. Now, if I go over to India, India has a descending line of Rahu passing through over this way, actually through Sri Lanka and Bengal, but also, so this is a descending line of Rahu, excuse me, and a line of Jupiter going through it. So essentially, that means short-term panic, but essentially it will resolve itself. And Mars is passing through what used to be called Indochina, so essentially Thailand, excuse me, Myanmar, China. So you can expect to see more violence in China and a lot of dissatisfaction as well. So that's really not surprising given the fact that they've, even though they're starting to engage in production again, they've shut down large parts of the country. And Mars, let me see, this line is a Mars line. So a moon line. And essentially that's going to give some anxiety connected with governments in Korea and China, also Indonesia. Finally, a sun line is passing through Japan. That doesn't look particularly bad to me, but sun line does indicate more authoritarian measures from governments. And this is a trend you're going to see across the world over the next couple of months, probably until around May or so. And when I say authoritarian, I'm not saying it in terms of Hitler or Stalin. I'm talking about essentially governments just essentially imposing mandates or limits on people, and they won't all be connected with disease. The other thing is So they'll be connected with trade and in other areas of life. And the Philippines has a sun line going through it. So does Borneo, and so does Indonesia. So again, those governments will tend to be rather harsh. And finally, as we get to the Sun Venus conjunction, we can expect to see some nasty weather um, over here and in Western Australia, and also in some hardship in Eastern Australia. New Zealand has a Rahu line passing through it, so there'll be a little bit of disease panic in New Zealand, and maybe even a bit of government scandal, which is unusual and surprising for that part of the world. So I'm going to stop the share for a second, and then I'm going to go back to it again, just because that's where I ensure the share is fresh. And let me do that one more time. Maybe it cooperates. And it does. Hooray. Okay, so I promise you, in a few months, these are going to be much, much better to look at. All right, so let's go back to the main screen. I realize it's a sense of intimacy that I get by sharing with you in this way, but I want to give you a better product, to be honest with you. So let's look at the individual charts for the different signs. And Aries has had a problem for the past year and a half, in that his financial aspirations have been frustrated. I think one of the things you'll see after March, won't happen immediately, but after March, is Aries will actually have increased financial benefits coming in, and actually a good deal of fame or recognition. And so they'll take the burden of money, but they'll be frustrated. They'll want more fame, and they'll want more recognition, they'll want more appreciation. Jupiter's in the 11th house for this sign, and Saturn's in the 10th house. So what does that mean in plain English? Well, basically, a lot of hard work working on communication efforts, a lot of secrets, a lot of luck connected romantically, although, like I said, it's really not a good thing to take things for granted when Venus is retrograde. So again, that's something where relationship life really won't be straight for about another couple of months, another 2 to 3 months actually. And also, but right now relationship life looks good for the sign, but also there are some problems with this sign losing its temper or getting a little bit over heated or over anxious, and so it'll have to watch its temper. It won't last long, about another month or so, and then it'll feel more secure and less like it's being cheated by other people. But that's a real fact. But career-wise, the sign is doing well. In terms of making money, it still wants to make more money. For Taurus, Taurus has its ruler Venus in the 8th house. So again, there's some ambivalence or uncertainty about relationship partners, and there's some ambivalence on the part of the sign as to whether or not it wants to stay in a relationship at all. And relationship partners seem to be uncaring or indifferent. And with Venus in the 8th house with the sun, the confidence of the sign is also knocked down a little bit. Now, in terms of work, it looks fine, because essentially Saturn and Mercury in conjunction in the 9th house will give good responsibilities, increased responsibilities. Jupiter will give great job opportunities. So overall, career-wise, it looks fine. In terms of children, in terms of money, it looks okay, but again, money's a little bit slow. And in terms of And this sign will also seem to be very sexy this month. It will seem to be very attractive this month, over the next week in particular. Now, the next sign we're looking at is Gemini, and Gemini has Rahu in the 12th house. We already discussed this to a certain extent in the earlier chart. And basically, this sign is kind of lucky this week, and it's also got some concerns over health and some concerns that it's being blocked in its ambitions by rivals. So it's very competitive. It's very aggressive right now. But relationship-wise, things seem to be going fine. It seems to be happy and it seems to be content. Saturn and Mercury are in the 8th house. That essentially, again, does indicate there are some people working against these individuals, but they're not really going to succeed all that strongly because Mercury is going to escape from that sign within about a month's time. The other thing is, there is a Mercury retrograde coming up too, by the way, I should mention. So Mercury will go back in the sign of Sagittarius in a few weeks, and so you'll actually see more luck, more short-term luck connected with communications. And also a good time for writing for this sign. Also, from the chart, the moon is in the 2nd house, is very weak in conjunction with the moon and Venus. So it'll be more hung up on sexual matters and relationships than normal. And also, it'll be spending its money on those things. It'll be essentially devoting its cash resources to those things. The other thing to keep in mind is that children will be a little bit, so health is an issue. Relationships are okay, but again, like I said, this is kind of a short-lived happiness. But again, every relationship goes through ups and downs. And Jupiter's in the 9th house, good for higher educational contacts, very good for getting known internationally. For Cancer, Cancer is having some issues with relationships, some communications issues with relationships, some financial ambiguity in relationships. They're not really sure whether or not the relationship partner is going to succeed. And also some trouble with children. So children will seem to be a little bit difficult or a little bit aggressive from this combination. Venus, Sun, Moon, again, a very competitive sign. Saturn's in the 7th house. This sign will stick with a relationship at least until next April or May, because it's made itself very stubborn about relationship. Jupiter's in the 8th house. Again, the person will seem to be very attractive, and will have a lot of potential suitors. So actually, it looks like a fairly good month or a fairly good week for Cancer, but a little bit mixed. For Leo, Leo has Jupiter in the 7th house. Again, a lot of opportunities for it to pick up new relationships, a lot of expansion of relationship opportunities. So that's good for this sign. That's also true of Aquarius, but it's not quite so obvious. And the 2nd house Lord is in the 6th house. So again, some difficulties in making or holding on to money. So there'll be competition for either roles or jobs, which will be strong. So this sign has Rahu in the 10th house. You'll get some fame or some recognition career-wise, but it will feel like it's not really doing what it's supposed to do, and that'll change around March or so. K2's in the 4th house, so there's a little bit of emotional detachment, maybe confusion emotionally going on with the sign. 5th house, again, a lot of romantic, not really attachments, but a lot of romantic interest in the sign. And again, it'll have opportunities for relationships. So this isn't particularly bad. Some fame and some recognition, but money is still hard to come by. Virgo has the Lord in the fifth house. It creates what's called a Raj Yoga, or a special planetary combination in the fifth house. And that Saturn aspects the seventh house. So what does that mean? Well, it means the relationship life will essentially be suspended or held in stasis for at least another half year for this chart, for this sign. Although emotionally, it will seem to be ready for a relationship. It's just not going to happen right away. So that's the Sun, Venus, Moon combination. Mars is in the third house. This will make this sign brave, ready to take on risks, ready to argue. Maybe it should not argue quite so much right now, but it's ready to argue. And it's going to argue more based upon facts than upon ideology. And Rahu's in the ninth house, so change in boss, change in supervisor, change in luck. It's basically not a bad placement to have Rahu in the ninth house, but it does frustrate promotional opportunities. It does frustrate to a certain extent pay increases. And bosses will seem difficult to please or a little bit strange, or there'll be a breaking in period with bosses. Libra has the Lord of the first house and the third house is a strong interest in creative activities, artistic activities, musical activities, but not a lot of money from those things, and also spending money on those things. So that's interesting to me. Mars is with K2 in the second house. That indicates sick spouse or sick relationship partner. That's relatively common nowadays, but for Libras, it's really profoundly true. Saturn's in the fourth house, good for education, good for self-discipline. Asteroid in the sixth, it'll wipe out any possibility of disease. And we have nothing in the seventh house, although I can always look at our friend Uranus and say Uranus gives some unexpected changes in relationships, but this is really only about halfway through a 7-year cycle. So it's really not, it's very strong. Uranus is very strong in this chart, but I think you'll probably see changes in relationships for this sign actually next year after March of 2022, when K2 enters Libra. For Scorpio, Scorpio has Mars in the first house. That gives it what's called a great personality yoga. Mars is in what's called a Ruchaka yoga, so it gives it the ability to command. Saturn is also in that kind of a yoga or combination in the chart, but for Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, and Aries rising signs. So for Scorpio, it just gives a lot of mass in the third house. So a lot of connection with brothers and sisters. Although brothers and sisters may be having difficult times with it health-wise, and also, at least in the chart, determination to communicate and determination to take on all comers in communications. So that's perhaps a little bit unwise, but that's what the chart is showing. The other thing is, with this sign, money looks actually kind of good this coming week, and Jupiter's in the fourth house, so that indicates home life will be more serene, more balanced, more comfortable. And finally, Rahu in the seventh. Rahu in the seventh. Again, some question about whether or not relationship life is worth holding on to. For a lot of people with this sign placement, Taurus and Scorpio, especially, the relationship is a little weak to begin with. For Sagittarius, we have a Sun, Venus, Moon combination. This sign will seem awfully attractive this month. And Saturn's in the second house. They won't be able to eat very much, so, and communication-wise, so it'll be very strong. But it'll actually say some nasty things, some difficult things. And Jupiter's in the third house, so there's a desire not to offend or not to hurt other people. Rahu's in the sixth house. That's overall, again, anxiety about illnesses. But the career house looks clear. That's the 10th house. Lord being that, so that's essentially Gemini being placed in the second house of communication. So that actually looks good for this sign in terms of being able to deliver communication solidly and firmly with no embellishments. Jupiter's in, I'm sorry, for Capricorn, Saturn's in the first house with strong ability to command or lead. Jupiter's in the second house. Jupiter's in the second house, it should give some financial benefit to this sign. And Rahu's in the fifth house, so some difficulty or disappointment with love affairs or with children. And Mars and Ketu are in the 10th house. There are a lot of distractions eating at this sign on the work front. And Sun, Venus, and Moon in the 11th house, very good for financial gains for this sign. And finally, let's go to Aquarius. Aquarius has Jupiter right in the first house. Rahu's in the fourth, career-wise. Mars and Ketu sit in the 10th. So again, a lot of anonymity in work life. Venus is in the 11th house. And finally, Venus, Sun, and Moon sit in the 11th house. So good financial undertakings, good for building up savings, and also a good time for commercial benefits. Pisces has no planets in it, but it does have Rahu in the third house, which will make it very brave, and it will make it extremely career focused. So any relationship matters will be filtered through career and what money it can bring into the relationship. Career will actually be likable and interesting and a little bit boring, at least to this particular point in time. And Mars and Ketu, you can get lucky by doing more exercise, by doing more weightlifting or aggressive physical exercise, at least from this chart. So that's it for this week. I hope you had a good time. I certainly did. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Don't worry. And again, one of the best things to do during tough astrological combinations, and these are tough astrological combinations, is to get creative, come up with new projects, come up with new ideas, come up with new solutions to things. Okay, so just don't accept and wait for things to get better. Try to change things on your own. Okay, all right. Again, namaste, happy new year, and my blessings upon all of you, and my love to all of you as well. All right, peace, and stay safe.